Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my show. I'm here with Pastor Joel from Music of Life Church Kimberly and Pastor Jonathan from Music of Life Church Appleton. We've been trying to get these two on our show for a long time. We had to bump Matt Damon just to get him on tonight because they are so booked. Gentlemen, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having us, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell Matt Damon we say hi and sorry about that.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any feelings.
Oh,
so
good.
I really want to ask you. I've wondered this for years. What was it like when you two first met?
What was it like when we first met? Well, these were the early days of before Music Life Church even started. The home, like our church was in a home here in northeastern Wisconsin, and I had been a part of the home church for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden this guy who's like this amazing leader and super talented man joins the home church, and it's like like, who is this guy stepping all over my game?
That's annoying.
Yeah, just like, come on, man. You know how much work I had to put in to be kind of an okay leader? This guy comes in and just changes the world. Are you kidding me? So I had been around these people that were the early home church for a couple of years. All of a sudden, Jonathan, through one of the original members of the home church, we had gotten to know him, and he started coming around. He lived like a 3-hour drive south of where we were stationed at the time, but he would come up and so I'd say in the very early years, it was our relationship really didn't kick off until after probably even a few years after he started coming around to the home church. Not that we weren't part of the same church together, but our relationship blossomed, especially once we started being associate pastors together at the original Music Life Church. But at first it was just very much learning, him coming around and immediately stepping into being a leader. There was this dynamic of like, okay, we've been mentored by the leaders ahead of us. And the beginnings of our relationship were really this dynamic of how do we, two guys in our mid to late 20s, who are passionate about ministry, how do we work together to start expanding the boundaries of this passion and this truth that God's given us? So that's really our original, like, the relationship started with us essentially being leaders in a church. That was kind of the dynamic we began with.
So really you'd had all of this experience together, and then you started working together and discovering kind of what you liked about each other, how you had to work together, how you had to adjust to each other.
Yeah, we did know each other it was 2009, I think we met. It was 2013 when Music Life Church started. So we had 4 years of experience and getting to know each other, but 2013 is where things really started changing.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that, our perception and how much what we knew about each other at that point was, you're more of someone that I serve with and spend a lot of time with, but not like deeply know.
Right.
Like I didn't really, Joel and I, we weren't, it wasn't like More Than a Feeling by Boston, that song when we first met. It was just more, it was more like, business.
Yeah, it felt more like we worked together. We weren't yet friends.
Yeah. That's so interesting, because when I see the two of you interact, it does seem like you've been best friends since you were 5 years old. It seems like there's all of this rich history. It's almost like you grew up together.
I mean, in a way we kind of did.
We were really some of the worst versions of ourselves together and to each other.
Yeah.
So there is definitely this sense of, Joel and I definitely became leaders and more, actualized versions of ourselves together. So it's
absolutely.
like the worst versions of being a pastor,
Sure.
like some of the worst versions of being friends, some of the worst versions of us like communicating, like a lot of the worst versions of ourselves. Like Joel knows my worst
Yeah.
version. Like when I turn into a super villain, it's like, oh, I was a super villain, around Joel a lot. So he knows that gear in me. He knows when I slip into that gear, and he can call me out on it. So a lot of that stuff is, how much we understand about who each other is, like, and so it's not necessarily, it's not a quantity of time that
Yeah.
makes us know each other. It's really the understanding, like we really understand each other. And Music of Life Church helps, I think, skip a bunch of years based upon how we help people learn about who they are and who someone else is, and to value the difference in each other. So I think that's what you kind of get with a best
Yeah.
friend, is like you go, wow, they're really different than me. Very rarely are best friends like super similar. They're
Right.
usually very different, and that's what kind of keeps them together.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like what you're saying is it's not about the quantity of time, it's about the quality of growth that you experience together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we have a handle at Music Life Church on really how to intentionally grow in fellowship and deepen intimacy with people on purpose. That's what,
Right.
intentionally on purpose. And because of that, you can have the depth of relationship with a person in a shorter amount of time than maybe a childhood friend you've known for 20 years.
Sure. Well, that makes so much sense. So, we're not exactly here to talk about your burgeoning past. I don't know if I'm using that word right. We're here to talk about a podcast. This podcast that you two have put together, What the Flock. It's all about helping people deal with having been hurt by churches. And we're here talking about two episodes in particular, love and humility. I want to ask, just overall, this podcast, where did this idea come from? What made you start caring so much about people who've been hurt by church to the point that you actually started a podcast, putting in all of this extra time and work that I don't know that we're getting paid for?
Yeah. Yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
the idea, it was years and years ago, this idea that a friend of ours had of, she what she did is she saw an interview with two pastors sitting on a couch together, and she was like, I would love for our pastors to do this. And then I started talking about it so much that I think I'm getting credit for the idea now.
Yeah, if I
Like
answered this question, I would have told you it was Jonathan's idea.
Bingo. So
I
I need to make sure in these interviews that I'm giving credit, to Laura, the woman who had the idea in the first place. Our friend Laura, one of the leaders of Music of Life Church.
Okay.
And she had this idea, and she showed me the video, and it was like, wow, this is cool. Like, it's really casual, these two pastors sitting down. And Laura's point was, imagine if the information was really, incredible and life-changing.
Okay.
Then it would be, then it's kind of a really safe context of, here's two people that want to care about you and then giving you great information. So I would say that the mission of Music of Life Church Kimberly, of Music of Life Church Appleton, is really focused on people who have been damaged by the church. And Pastor Joel and I being Exhibit A and Exhibit B in this story. Like, we talk about it all the time.
Yep.
We are the people who have been damaged by church. It happens weekly.
Yeah.
It's amazing how often it happens. So we have a passion for these people, and we wanted to help get that message outside of the walls of our church, which is really what it is. It's like, we're trying to reach people who, don't live in the area, who maybe haven't heard of our church. And podcasts are super hot right now. I think if there was a different medium to be able to reach other people, we would do that. If it was clowning, dressing up in clown costumes, if that was going to, get the message out about people who've been hurt by church, I think we would do that. So we'd probably do that together, and it would be, we'd get better at it as time went on. But anyway, so that's where it came out of, and it's really the mission of our churches, refuge, restoration, repair, through a podcast to people who've been hurt by church.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree with what he said. Me and Pastor Jonathan, early on in our pastoring together, started having weekly meetings with each other. That increased to at least twice a week. And even now, after we branched out and planted a Music Life Church Kimberly and a Music Life Church Appleton, and now we're both senior pastors, we still meet. We still meet at least twice a week. The dynamic of those conversations have changed because we're not leading the same local church together. We're both leading our own churches. It's enriched our relationship in a lot of ways, and it's changed what we're talking about often. But as early as this week, like a few days ago, before we're on your show here, Andrew, we had a conversation where we were still talking about how we are the people who've been hurt by church. And not just we have been hurt by church and now we're helping people who've been hurt by church. It's we're still being hurt by church. There are still interactions we're having with other churches, other pastors, where we are being hurt. And the reason we're able to pastor churches with a focus on helping those people is because we've learned how to have God repair our lives with each other and with God's influence in our lives to repair that damage ourselves. And we've been able to take that experience of repair, turn it into understanding to give it to other people. So that's really what's qualified us to be able to help other people in these situations. But what I'm often surprised by still is that my church damage isn't a story of my past. My church damage is a story of something that's still happening. And I think we've said multiple times before, we would love for Music Life Church, any Music Life Church, to never have to exist anymore, because that would mean church isn't hurting people anymore. But unfortunately, from our experience, we have a pretty solid business plan as far as, or focus or mission, is like people keep getting hurt, and
there's a big crowd.
The need for Music Life Church is growing.
Yeah.
So that's where. So we have all this information God's given us over all these years, and we have so many resources. We have so much content.
Right.
That what we're trying to do, we don't want to hold on to it. It's not our job to get this content so we can hold it for ourselves. It's our job to get this content from God so it can be establishing other people and helping other people be able to stand in the midst of the storms that are coming at us. And so that's really, this podcast is another extension of that, just a way for us to get this content God's given us into the hands of other people.
Excellent. That's beautiful. And now you both have mentioned you have been hurt by church. You're still being hurt by church. What does that look like? How do you handle that pain? What's a story of you getting hurt, and how do you overcome that?
Great question. So, we're Music of Life Church Appleton, Kimberly, we often will refer to it as like the Music of Life Church system. So if you hear me say the Music of Life Church system, I mean Kimberly and Appleton together. We're a relatively small community.
Okay.
So we don't want to stay small. We don't want to be small. We happen to be small. I'm not opposed to being bigger. That would be cool. More people, right?
Right.
More people getting help. So But the feedback that we get a lot from the outside tends to be very, very negative. You know, being labeled as heretics or legalistic or, you know, liberal. Like we get called all of the names from all of the other sides of the argument. And it seems like everyone's kind of like, and it seems this way, but we don't feel very supported by, you know, different churches in our area. And so we and different individuals outside of our church. And that's okay. Like that's part of the story of you know, walking the way that we walk. And so what happened you know, recently is I got a message, man, should I just talk about this? I will. I got a message yesterday posted on one of the interviews that we had. And someone basically said that they were implying that this podcast that we're doing is to make money.
Yeah.
And it was just it's like there's 0 comments.
Yeah.
There's 0 comments,
Yeah.
just like 5 likes.
Yeah.
And then 1 negative comment. And that's been like and the reason why I'm laughing is because this has been our story so much. It's just such a small group of people that are using it. And then like one person from the outside comes in and checks it out and then says something negative. Now, this person did ask a question. He said, why does this podcast need to exist if God's grace is infinite and immediate? So they asked that. Why do we need this podcast if God's grace is infinite and immediate? Oh yeah, because people need to make a living. So instead of me, you know, like kind of triggering at that person, instead of me lashing out and saying, you know, and justifying what it is that we're doing, what I decided to do is I wanted to give the person who posted it kind of the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're being drawn to this podcast to comment to this podcast, and they want to have a conversation, they want to talk, but they maybe don't have the skills, and they're unable, you know, potentially to have a conversation, but they want to have it. They want to be able to talk about it. So I gave that person the benefit of the doubt. This was yesterday. And I asked, you know, I responded and said, hey, the podcast exists to help people who've been hurt by church. Thanks for reaching out. What is your definition of God's grace? And that was my response to him. And my mind was blown, because I'm going to get out my cell phone here, because he commented. Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. And I just have to take a call. That's all. No. And he responded. So here was his response.
Yeah.
He said, I was just responding absently. My apologies. That is an excellent mission. And so I was saying that I was saying to Morgan, I was like, before this happened, I'm like, I did the rant that I shared with you. How come we're such a small community? And the one comment is something that's negative. Like, so to answer your question, how do I respond to that? Well, not always like, yes, this is exactly how it should be. You know, like, oh, I anticipate this. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm so sick of this. Like, I'm surprised by it. And I want to change that. I want to change my response to that. I want to expect it. But that's how I got through it. You know, like I got that emotion out with someone who's safe, who loves me. You know, I'll do that with Pastor Joel. every week. That's why we need to talk twice a week.
Yeah.
There's lots of things. And so I get that emotion out. I strategize with, Pastor Joel on how to respond to that message from this guy. And I gave him the benefit of the doubt. And his response back was to apologize and actually affirm our podcast, that the mission of our podcast. So it was one of these faith building experiences for me that sometimes, I don't know, he said he was absent. So he saw it, he just posted it and then went on his way.
Right.
And it
Maybe
sounds
that's
like
when he was damaged by church.
Yeah, it sounds like
exactly, because he went right at the money thing, right?
Yeah.
Everyone needs to make a living, and it's like, dude, I feel you.
Yep.
I see that a lot.
Yeah.
People trying to make money off of the flock of God, like that's their goal. And so people can be damaged like that. So taking that backward step, that's what we call it, taking a backward step instead of going, what do you ask a question and share on yourself about that. And so I shared about the mission, and honestly, I was shocked, and it's incredible. So anyway,
and I'm seeing it for the first time now. I was aware.
Yeah,
of
what
this.
do you think about that?
I love that. I love it, and it does. I see the guy. He does seem like somebody who's been hurt by church. One of my thoughts is, man, I'd love for him to listen to our tithing episode. Because I think that addresses this money issue in the church and treating church like a business. But what I love is, Pastor Jonathan, it would have been really easy for Pastor Jonathan to be defensive. And our experience tells us that would be the right move. But because he gave this gentleman the benefit of the doubt, Pastor Jonathan didn't take any missteps in how he interacted with them. And the guy actually proved he deserved the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So that's why it's so important to make sure, even if we think someone's coming at us, or if we're 100% sure somebody's coming at us with an abusive way of communicating, how we respond to that is so important, because I could be wrong. And so it's interesting. So he has, I love that it's such a current example. This was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
That was on the Music Life Church Appleton Facebook page. Well, wouldn't you know it, like 8 days ago, there was a similar interaction on the Music Life Church Kimberly Facebook page in response to us sharing one of our podcast episodes. It was a sharing a podcast episode post. And I got a response from it. So we're talking about experience of church damage. I could go back and tell you stories from when I was a young, 20-something year old Christian. But I think it's more important to show how recent these things are still happening. Because we got on this post on Facebook, public post, a gentleman asks this question: aren't you those guys who trash and try to intimidate people who disagree with you? Now, what I did is the same response that Pastor Jonathan did, is, I shared what happened with this interaction with the people that I know I have in my life that can give counsel. But this was really easy for me to deal with, because this is a topic we've dealt with a lot. Where the difference between what Pastor Jonathan dealt with and what I dealt with is mine's dealing with gossip. The gentleman who posted on Pastor Jonathan's Facebook page was posting something that was just his perspective about what he projected onto this podcast interview. And it was dealt with really, really well on both sides. My side, the guy sets up this whole context of, aren't you those guys I've heard this thing about? Now we're dealing with gossip, which this has been probably the area. We've had so many issues with gossip in our church, really, of people outside of our church gossiping about us. And this has been like the number one thing we've dealt with since our, even going all the way back to the home church. So my first thought though is, you know what? At least this guy is coming to us, right?
That's a great perspective.
There you go. That's great.
Yeah.
It took some courage for him to post this publicly. More courage than the people who he heard this from, who we haven't heard from.
Right.
So my first response to him was to say, thank you for the question, because it was a question.
Right.
And then I assured him, you know, we try to be understanding of people of all beliefs and loving of people of all beliefs. And then I asked him this question: who did you hear this from? Because now I'm in the mentality of, I need to help this guy, because if he doesn't deal with this the right way, he could be enabling breaking of defamation laws in the state of Wisconsin, or worse, committing an abomination to the Lord by sowing seeds of discord among believers.
Mm.
So what we try to counsel people in these gossip areas is, there's two moves. If I have an issue with somebody, I should go to that person and talk to that person about that issue. Or number two, if I hear somebody else talking to me about an issue they have with a third party, I should tell that person, you should go and talk to the person you have an issue with. Or just so you know, if you don't, and you keep talking about this person, you are in danger of breaking state law, and worse, breaking God's laws. So it sounds really confrontational, but what we're really trying to do is help people communicate in a godly fashion, and also guard against breaking laws, both state laws of the land and God's laws. So that's an example of not only us experiencing church damage. We have these people talking about us in really negative and detracting ways that are hurting other people who hear about us. And but at the same time, we are helping those very people who are talking. And that's what we think is the ultimate example of what Jesus showed us in how to deal with a person abusing or committing an injustice against you. Is not only I won't take out justice on that person, I will help that person. And that's really the mentality and the mission of Music Life Church as a whole, as a system, as both our churches, this podcast. We want to help everybody, even the people who hate us. So yeah, it happens. It happens often.
Okay.
It's still a current issue.
Yeah.
And it's something that we're excited to learn more and more the right way to handle this, because it's helping a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, I totally get the perspective of, wouldn't it be nice if these people would just talk to us about their issue? As a teacher, I'm constantly dealing with students.
Mm.
I regularly hear about the issues they have with other teachers, and I never hear about the issues they have with me. Like, I know you're talking about me too in everyone else's class. I want to hear about it. But no matter how many times I tell them that, no matter how many different ways I assure them, I just want to help you have a great classroom experience, they're afraid to talk about it. They always think they're going to get in trouble for having a bad time.
Or I think, talk about the humility episode. It's like what I think, let's give these backbiters the benefit of the doubt here for a minute.
Right.
Why is that such an issue in our culture? Because this is in the church. This is in America. This is like, people gossip and they don't even recognize it's a behavior that they shouldn't do. Why? How often, when I do bring my issues to another person, are they actually hearing me? How often, when I bring my issues to another person, does that person blow up at me and trigger and show me that they're not a person that I can bring these issues with, because they don't handle it well? They don't hear me. They get defensive, or they start getting into attack mode. Right. So that's why what me and Pastor Jonathan have committed to do, and what we try to do, is always be open to, when other people bring issues to us, to hear them. Doesn't matter what you have to say. Doesn't matter if you hate our guts. Doesn't matter if you call us cult leaders or heretics. We will hear you, because we are trying to exercise that principle of humility, where we could be wrong. We could learn something from you that we aren't, or we could see a perspective from you that we're not seeing ourselves. So I think that's also, our culture has enabled this attitude of gossip because people don't handle being confronted well.
Right. I want to talk about that for a second, about the culture, about humility. Right? We hear so much about love. We see it in movies, we hear it in songs, we see people say it to each other on the street, but I don't usually see humility brought up. I see arrogance and pride being admonished, but I don't see people talking up humility. Why do you think that is in our culture? Why don't people see humility as a virtue the way we see patience or love?
I think because right off the bat, I would say the culture's definition of humility is weakness. Is being to be humble means to be not ambitious. To be humble means that you're not really that confident in what you believe.
So can I just cut in? What would it look like to be both ambitious and humble?
I think that's a great question. I think it would be fiercely, with emotion, with a desire to understand someone else and find out areas that you are wrong in. So people have a wonky definition of humility.
Okay.
And it's not considering that you have a different perspective. It's the appearance of, not being intelligent or all of those things that, wow, that person's really humble. Well, Jesus says he, oh, what does that look like to be ambitious and humble? Jesus' time on planet Earth.
Oh, I totally.
Or every single conversation that God has with any human being. Like every single example.
That's a great point.
Is Jesus. Jesus is humble. He's willing to consider a different perspective. Father God is humble. He's willing to see another perspective. But they are fierce in their interactions with other people.
Right.
So we see that. So, in order to, I think, operate from a place of humility or to be ambitious and humble, at the same time, you just have to have the right definition of humility. And humility is not a feeling. Humility is, being able to consider another perspective, including that you could be wrong.
That's a great humility not being a feeling. I love that. I just want to really point that out.
Yeah, and it's also not. I see humility is often seen as self-deprecating, where that's where I have to not feel great about who I am in order to be humble, and it's this lowly position where I can be the most confident like Jesus and God the Father are the most confident. They can't be more confident in who they are. They've capped out on that. Yet they are humble. I mean, I'm sitting here going through all these examples in the Bible.
Yeah, pick one. Like, honestly, it's like, pick an example.
Yeah, seriously, it is. I mean, it's funny, just even thinking of the negotiation between God the Father and Abraham over Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just like, yeah, all right, that's Jehovah. That's the Father being really confident and really, passionate and a God of justice, a God of righteousness, yet also willing to sit and have this conversation and this negotiation with Abraham. It's like, oh, what an amazing Father. That's ambitious and humble.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, when the woman's caught in the act of adultery, and all of the people come to Jesus looking to stone the woman, Jesus' response is, he goes and he writes in the ground, and they come at him again, and then he stands up and says, he who is without sin cast the first stone. And that's such a humble response, because Jesus gave them a way to stone the woman.
Yeah.
You know, he who's without sin cast the first stone. So, you know, in that story, like when I was growing up, it's like, who is without sin in that conversation? It's Jesus. You know, like Jesus could have stoned the woman is essentially what, you know, what he's doing, what he's saying, but that is humble. Okay, you want to do this thing? You want to do this thing? Here, let me give you a way to do it. And they were convicted. They're like, oh man, if I'm going to take a stone and I'm going to throw it at someone who has sin, what am I saying about every time that I sin? I should be stoned.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that, Jesus. I really that. And they all kind of drop their stones and back off. It's an incredible story, man. So
yeah, it's the most appreciated and underappreciated story in the Bible. Like it's well known, very popular. People know it. People are drawn to it, connect with it.
Right.
Yet Jesus's mastery of words and of confrontation is above anything else.
Yeah.
That's great. And Pastor Joel, I love the point about the self-deprecating humor, because I fall into that. It's hard for me to talk about, but I've always been really ambitious unto arrogance. I've always been very confident, and it's never been hard for me to go, I want to go in this direction. I know what I need to do, and I'm going to go there, and I'm going to be successful. And I think I'm humble, because the strategy is to find people who know better than me so that I can learn.
Right.
But I've been told, Andrew, your confidence is a little intimidating. And my response to that has been to go, fine, then I won't talk about how confident I am. I'll tell everyone how much I suck as often as I can so that people don't feel intimidated by me and will let me help them.
I tell people that too, so I'm glad we're on the same path. I mean, never mind.
And that's where
how much I suck.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, you know, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, and it goes back to, why are we saying and doing the things that we do?
Right.
Like if I'm saying to someone that I'm confident, or if I'm saying something that's self-deprecating, those two things in and of themselves are not right or not wrong. They're just facts. If I'm confident, I am confident. If I am self-deprecating, trying to be funny that way, I am trying to be funny. Those are facts. It all goes back to the ultimate answer of all of these podcasts is really love. Who benefits from the self-deprecating? Who's benefiting from me sharing with someone that I'm confident in this? Because there's a way that I can be self-deprecating and, you know, confident for my benefit, and it hurts someone else. It causes someone to not feel safe. And there's a way that I can be confident, you know, and self-deprecating for someone else's benefit. You know, like when people come into Music of Life Church Appleton and they're really like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in church again. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. That's when I can say, yeah, you know what? I'm like 50% want to be here too. Like,
yeah,
you know, and I'm the senior pastor. So
should we just leave?
Yeah, we should.
You want to go to a park and hang out?
Yeah, seriously. There's a bar literally 5 steps away. But it's, you know, it's things like that. You know, we can get a good buzz before we go to church.
Yeah.
Like all of these things, it's like, whose benefit is that for? There's sometimes when it is for their benefit, and sometimes when it's not. So that's what I always say. Like, I want people, if they're gonna fail and if they are gonna do something wrong, do it with the goal to try to love someone else, and anything else we can really fix.
Yeah,
that's beautiful. And I love it. Sounds like you're connecting, just adjusting your approach to someone based on them and this concept of love, which is fantastic. I really want to talk a little bit more about that, because Pastor Joel, I've heard that You are a master theologian with multiple degrees in biblical studies, coming from a long line of pastors that you've spent years reading the word and investigating it to the point where you have a blog that takes people through one read of the Bible as if it's 5. And Pastor Jonathan, I've heard you used to be a musician.
Oh man.
Those are two
That's so good.
Those are two very different viewpoints on love, right? I mean, how many Beatles songs are just about being in love?
I don't know, that joke, I'm gonna need a minute to think about right after that joke.
Who are the Beatles? Yeah.
Oh
man, that's so funny. Okay, what did you say? How many what?
Right, how many Beatles songs have the concept of love in them? But is that the same as the concept of love that Jesus and God talk about in the Bible? How are those two concepts different from each other? How are they related, and how do we as a society get impacted by both of them?
That's awesome. Like, I mean, I definitely with the music stuff, this is when people sing about love. I would say that the musical definition of love has a tendency to be a strong affection.
Okay.
Towards someone, like the deepest affection that one could feel towards another human being. But it's a feeling. It's this desiring to be with this person, you know, like almost like you could describe it as like an addiction. It's a feeling of an addiction that you have to this person that you can never get enough. You can never get enough of this person. So oftentimes in songs, it is like, I can't get enough of you. I have this addiction for you. No, that's not as poetic. You know, all you need is addiction, you know. But that is really musically, that's what it is. And I think that's when someone says, I love my wife, I love tacos, I love my dog. That's what they mean. I have this deep affection. I can't spend enough time with my wife. I can't spend enough time with my dog. I can't eat enough tacos is usually like what they're saying. I think if they mean it in a musical context, but it is very different, you know, and sometimes it's just synonymous with like. I like this thing, and they just swap it with I love this thing. But liking and loving in that context is based upon a feeling, based upon an emotion that someone has towards something. And I don't think Jesus was purely talking about emotions when he talked about that. And I'll let Pastor Joel jump in there.
Yeah, so I mean, emotions are important. That and we're not, and even from the theological side of this, to deny that would be theologically unsound. Because I could even give you the doctrine behind why those songs work. It's because it's not really drawing on love from a theological sense. It's drawing on the doctrine that every person who's ever existed, who currently exists, and whoever will exist has this in common. They want to feel connected to other people. And that's really what these songs are drawing on, is this deep desire intrinsic within all of us to be deeply connected to others, and even one person more than anybody. And that's why a lot of these songs are real poetic and more on the abstract level. They're not defining love, which actually makes them more accessible to more people, because everybody's got all these different definitions of what they think love is. If I don't define it and I just talk about the way it feels, it's going to draw all these people
that
in.
Makes sense.
But it's drawing on this intrinsic desire to be connected to another person. Theologically, love is both action and attitude. So it does address a feeling as well, but the feeling's in effect. So love is giving without expecting anything in return. So giving's the action, without expecting is the attitude. So it does require mental and emotional aspects of a person to love someone else. But when I feel connected to another person, it does happen in response to me loving that person, or in response to that person loving me. Love in and of itself is the cause of that connection everybody wants to feel. But what music tries to do, or often what music often makes us, I don't want to blame music here. What I think people end up doing is we want a shortcut.
Okay.
I don't want to give without expecting, because that's hard. I do want to
Mhm.
feel this connection. So you know what I'll do? I'll make this feeling my main focus. I'll make this feeling the cause. And unfortunately, it doesn't work. You can't muscle your way into feeling, indefinitely feeling something for someone else. And, you know, it's actually a C.S. Lewis quote I used in a sermon just last week. Is if love was a feeling, you could never promise to love someone forever, unless you could also, or that would be like promising to never have a headache again. That just sounds logical. I'll promise to never have another headache again for the rest of my life.
We'll
That's
never
no
be
different.
sad near you.
Right. But if love is an action I have intentional, I can intentionally do. I can promise to love somebody, or promise to do my best to love somebody forever.
Mm-hmm.
If it is something I do have control over. So that would be my theological side of this whole thing.
That's beautiful. So how do we bring those together? How do we really bring that theological love and that contemporary love? And how do we reach more people to help them be better at love?
I think it's tying the uniqueness thing into it. Because when I love somebody, if I'm doing it for their benefit, and you named it already, Andrew, it's the way I love a person is going to effectively is going to be based on who they are as a person. Now, when I love somebody from the theological side of things, that means I'm giving a value to you. That whether that's love or not is based on whether it's a value to you, not if I think it's a value. I don't buy you a fishing pole because I like fishing. That's not love, even if I don't expect anything in return.
Right.
So the way you're going to feel this cultural or emotional or feeling is when the value that you're being given is really connected to who you are as a person. You're without effort going to feel connected to the person who's loved you, because you're going to see, holy cow, this person knows me. Oh, that feels, that's such a good feeling. That's such a good feeling.
Yeah. And I would say, you know, how do we get more people to love and, you know, connect that feeling or that emotion with the fact, or that right definition of giving without expecting? We do it all the time with our restoration program. Music of Life Church has a restoration program that helps people know, and that's a lot of where restoration ends, is you know, being able to give love uniquely to other people and being able to receive love uniquely. Like, how do I do those things on purpose? Well, I first need to kind of get out of the hole that I've dug myself in all of these years. And when people are in a hole, they crave love, but they don't know. It's like being in the dark, you know, and sometimes I feel loved by this person when someone says this, like, sometimes I feel loved when someone gives me a hug. Sometimes I don't feel love when someone gives me a hug, and you're just kind of in the dark about all that. So our restoration program really helps kind of turn the light on in someone's life and helps them, you know, make progress out of a hole that they've dug themselves in, so that they can finally have, you know, the energy and the ability to love other people and be loved. That's how we do it. So if anyone out there is looking for restoration, looking to experience that, there is a free program that specifically Music of Life Church Kimberly offers people. They've got amazing coaches, amazing information to help people love and feel loved, to have that feeling, to wake up in the morning and be like, oh, that's what I want. I want to wake up in the morning and feel that energy of like, I'm loved and I am loved and I'm loving other people.
That makes a lot of sense. I have a couple of different students that I know I interact with in completely different ways. I would say, I'll give you two examples. I'll say if their flavors, one is sweet and the other is very salty, like the saltiest, like ultimate umami. And the one who's sweet, he's very talented, he's hardworking. Whenever someone's in pain, he is on top of it. He just wants to help everybody to feel pretty good. He wants the whole class having a good time. And he's just so gentle. And so I'll say to him, well, I really appreciate how nice and caring you are. Whenever he does something, I'll just affirm that. But then I have a girl who she'll say something like, oh, why do I even have to be in this class? This is dumb. Why are we learning? But she can't stop smiling while she says it. So it's her words are salty, but she's having fun. This is how she connects.
Yeah.
And so I'll sass her back. I'll go,
nice.
I don't know. Why do I have to put up with you?
Yeah. Why are you?
And then she laughs.
Yeah.
If I said that to any other student, they might go, oh, that's so mean.
Yeah.
That's mean.
Yep.
Instead, she says, this is why you don't have a girlfriend.
Yeah.
Every time.
And keep going. Yeah.
Jabs right back at you. That's awesome.
Right. Right. And so I end up having this great relationship with different students because I'm trying to figure out them to make them feel connected.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what you're telling me. It sounds like the key to really embracing the humility and the love is to start by going, I don't know this person. Maybe I should understand them a little bit first. And then how can I give to them out of what I understand?
Yeah, that's a perfect way to wrap up those two doctrine together. That's a great way to say that. Yeah.
Amazing.
Gentlemen, I have one more question, just a little fun one, just to wrap things up. Who is your, now you're both pastors, who is your favorite character, person from the Old Testament?
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's easy for me.
Go ahead.
I thought this might be easy for you.
Oh yeah, this was easy for me. That it's King David. Golly, like the stories of him, he is super talented. He does all of these different things, man after God's own heart, shepherd, warrior, leader, musician, king, and at the core of everything is he is after God's heart. That, like, to me, that's it. I could cry. Like that's he is an embodiment of everything that I'm trying to be like.
Well, and talk about someone who has church damage. The head of the church in his time was trying to kill him.
Yeah, that's a great
wow.
Point. Yeah.
I did not see that.
Yeah.
Right. And all of his responses to that person were, like, I would say most all of them were pretty well perfect. But his response to being wrong, like he was wrong, but his response to being wrong was epic, So, yeah, the census, Bathsheba, cutting Saul's robe, like all of those things, like those big mess ups, those big screw ups, his response was awesome. So he's my hero.
And he's showcased in our restoration process quite often as the example of these merciful and forgiving behaviors. So yeah, he's amazing. That's a hard one not to pick, because I tend to my favorite story from the Old Testament to preach from is David and Goliath. But my answer would be Gideon. He's the one I always go back to. He's usually the first one that came to my mind. And I've preached about Gideon often as well. And I actually have recently again to go from why would you choose me? I'm the weakest in my family, and my family's the smallest in our tribe. But the angel of the Lord sees something in Gideon that he hadn't quite seen himself yet. A mighty man of valor. And to go from threshing wheat in the winepress to commanding his 300, and to do so emphatically, yelling the sword of the Lord and of Gideon as they defeat the enemy without having to lift a sword is just not only really great to see the progression of Gideon, but to see his reliance and his faith in Jehovah to fight that battle for them. The battle belongs to the Lord, you know, just like kind of like the same mentality David had with David and Goliath. It's like, this is the battle. This is the Lord's battle. Like, I'll just do what the Lord's telling me and I'll be fine.
Exactly.
But what I really learned recently about that story that's making me love it even more is the progression that God the Father brings Gideon through was a progression that not only increased Gideon's own spiritual maturity, but it enabled and facilitated Gideon to replicate himself into his army. So what you have at the end of that story is 300 other mighty men of valor.
Wow.
300 other Gideons
All the
fighting the battle of the Lord. It's such an epic story, which I love the epic story, right? Lord of the Rings, like all these epic, like Gideon's story is an epic story. David and Goliath is epic. Samson is epic. These epic stories of these heroic journeys. But to go from, I'm in this really small family, to shouting with my 300 men, like, yeah, we're gonna whoop some butt here because we're taking direction from God. It's like that. To me, that doesn't get better than that.
That's fantastic. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Go check out the What the Flock podcast. I'm sure at some point we've all been hurt by church, and this podcast is a great way to help us relieve some of that pain and start to figure out that maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe there is something more here. Thank you so much. I hope you both have a great day.
Thanks, Andrew. That was great.
Thanks, man.